Welcome back to Spoiler Free Wrestling, everyone. And All Elite Wrestling's co-executive vice president, Cody Rhodes, is currently rehabbing a knee injury while making arrangements for Double or Nothing on May 25th from Las Vegas. Now, recently he was on social media, and when presented with a clip of his father, Dusty Rhodes, performing in ECW, Cody had some interesting comments regarding how this time impacted the American dream. So Cody was shown a clip here of Dusty Rhodes versus Steve Corino from the ECW Living Dangerously pay-per-view. I think they've said guilty as charged here, but it was the Living Dangerously pay-per-view from 2000. It was the first match on the show. And Cody wrote of this experience of his father's. He said, "This changed Dream's whole career. He was concerned the ECW crowd wouldn't take to him. They loved him, opened his mind to a whole new world of wrestling, and he brought that with him on his further ventures." So this was true. A lot of people talk about how great the ECW fans were back in the day, but they could also be ruthless. And if you weren't an ECW guy, if they hadn't decided you were the type of wrestler that they loved in ECW, they would boo you unmercifully. And so that Dusty was concerned about how the ECW fans would take to him showed that Dusty wasn't confident that he would get over with the ECW crowd, but he did. He got over very big during that time. Now, not long after Dusty Rhodes passed away in 2015, Steve Corino spoke to the Two-Man Power Trip podcast, which is a podcast featuring Shane Douglas, I believe. And Corino reiterated the story of how he found out that he was going to work with Dusty Rhodes in ECW. And so this is happening in late 1999. Dusty Rhodes came in, kind of cut some promos, and then wrestled a bunch of matches from January 2000 to May 2000 in ECW. And a lot of them are on the WWE Network. All right, so Steve Corino said in 2015 regarding how he found out he'd be working with Dusty Rhodes 15 years earlier, he said, "We always used to joke with Tommy Dreamer. He would always talk about himself in the third person as the Dream. So I didn't even know Dusty was in the building that night. When he said, 'You were working with the Dream,' I said, 'Okay, cool, what are we doing?' Just thinking that I was wrestling Tommy Dreamer. And he said, 'No, you were doing something with the Dream,' as in Dusty Rhodes. The first thing I did when we met was say, 'Sir, we have a promo, so what would you like to do?' He said, 'Kid, if you're as good as they say you are, then we don't need to talk about anything, just do it.' And then Corino continued to say, 'The original plan was he was just going to give me one big elbow. I would bump for him and roll out and we would be done. We weren't sure if we were using it for TV because he had just been released by WCW, and as soon as they came alive for the first elbow, Jack Victory ran in there, and I'd get back up, then he would get back up and stayed in the center for the big elbow.' And then finally he said, 'Right from there, Rhodes told Paul Heyman, put me in a program with this kid. Paul asked, how do you see this ending? And I said a bull rope match, and we ended up doing a bull rope match, and it really was the greatest thing.' Well, Dusty Rhodes wrestled in 7 matches for ECW. You can see it on your screen now. And 4 of those 7 matches involved a bull rope. 2 traditional bull rope matches, 1 extreme bull rope match, where it was him teaming with New Jack the Sandman and Tommy Dreamer against Jack Victory, Rhino, Steve Corino, and Tajiri. And then also an old school bull rope match as well. So that's Dusty Rhodes' record from ECW. If you have the WWE Network, you can go in the ECWs on TNN from early 2000. You can find a little bit of Dusty Rhodes there. And then the pay-per-view match, the big pay-per-view match between Dusty Rhodes and Steve Corino, the old school bull rope match from ECW Living Dangerously 2000. It is the first match to open the show. Now, also in regards to this feud between Steve Corino and Dusty Rhodes, it was referenced in Ring of Honor in 2017 when Cody actually confronted Steve Corino about comments Corino had made during the feud with Dusty. Corino had told Dusty Rhodes he has no respect for him, and then almost 2 decades later, Cody would say nearly the same thing back to Steve Corino. Now, there was a lot of significance to Dusty Rhodes in ECW at that time. He wasn't in ECW long, but and ECW had already brought in legends from the past, such as Terry Funk, who had obviously played such a big role with the promotion early on. Rhodes' time with the company seemed to add almost a new level of credibility, however, as ECW had just debuted on the Nashville network at the time, which people thought was going to be a big deal for them, and ended up, of course, not being. And Dusty's post-ECW career is significant as well, because following his stint in ECW, Rhodes opened Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling. It was a local promotion, and Steve Corino would often perform for that promotion as well. Rhodes would then work with TNA Wrestling until 2005 when he was signed to work with WWE. One of his big projects not long after he started with WWE is Rhodes took over as the head of creative for WWE's newly relaunched ECW brand in late 2006. Of course, that position was opened up after Paul Heyman quit the company following or during a just terrible December to Dismember pay-per-view that year. And then, of course, Dusty Rhodes would continue with WWE until his death in 2015. So I thought this was interesting, these comments that Cody wrote about what Dusty Rhodes' time in ECW meant to him. I do recommend logging on to the WWE Network and checking out Living Dangerously 2000. Old school bull rope match, Dusty Rhodes versus Steve Corino. As Cody Rhodes has mentioned here, this match meant a lot to the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. Thanks again, everyone. I'm the Guy from Spoiler Free Wrestling.